Do you mind the wee hoose at Breckenside?" It was Silver Sand who was speaking, and we were all gathered about the big open fireplace of Isle Rathen in the frosty gloaming. "Mind it?" cried a voice, quick and indignant as one having authority. "Mind it? I heard the tale when I was a lassie, and I never want to hear it mair. It's enough to keep us all from sleeping. We'll hae none of your stories of witches and warlocks in my hoose, if you please, Mr. John Farr." But at this there was, of course, great wonderment among all the younger folk. The lads gathered in closer, where they sat making baskets of plaited willow wands, while the maidens disclaimed their desire to hear any horrible tale, but nevertheless hitched in their chairs closer so that they might not lose a word. They looked over their shoulders whenever the door opened suddenly behind them, and I doubt not felt pleasurable fears sting them momently in the marrow each time a dog barked. "Ah, weel," said Silver Sand quietly, "since it's no your pleasure, Mistress May, we will say nothing more of the wee cot of Breckenside, the old miser Hobby Kinmont, and that poor young lass Elsie, wha was shut up for the space of a summer's nicht with the terrible monster." "Wait till my mother gangs to the milk-house and then tell us," whispered one of the bright-eyed maidens, whose work had power to move the old wanderer's heart to tell his best tales. "Oh, deed," laughed the mistress of Isle Rathen, "ye can drive on with your tale, Silver Sand. Dinna make a mounster of me in my ain hoose. But gin the bairns dinna sleep this nicht arter haeing you daft havers dinned in their lugs, you and the goodman might e'en bide in the turret chamber with the rats, or sleep in the barn gin ye like, for into my kitchen ye dinna come, nor lie in bed o' mine this nicht." "Weel," said Silver Sand philosophically, "I hae spent some time in war places than either, and with that same goodman of yours too, Mistress May. But with your permission, I will tell this tale of how Elsie danced for her life." And this was Silver Sand's story. "There is no house on Breckenside now," he said, "only as ye gang your ways up the brae face at the turn of the road, where the burn runs bonny and clear down in the dell, and the heather reaches down among the green breckens that give the place its name, ye may see a kind of knowe or hillock, that is, as it may be, a thocht greener than the lave. Not one stone is to be seen upon another. The kindly mould is over all. The hemlock and the bloody fingers grow tall where lovers cawed their crakes by the ingle-nook, and of all the well-set yard where the miser grew his lint and dibbled his potatoes, only a single lilac bush now stands in the corner that overlooks the road. Now at this lonely yet heartsome place dwelt for many a year auld Hobby Kinmont and his daughter Bell. She had the name of being bonny to look on in her young days, and many a lover came to see the miser's heiress that would fain have hung up his hat behind the door and taken his seat at Hobby Kinmont's table as the old man's son-in-law. But old Hobby was a far-seeing carle, and not to be cheated by any flairty. "When I hae a want o' any good sons," he would say, "I'll put up a notice in the window, or hae intimated in the kirk." Hobby had the name of a warlock too, and the neighbours used to wonder at the strange noises that were to be heard at mirk midnight about the cot of Breckenside, and the lights that were gaed wandering athwart the leas. It werena canny, they said, no more than decent that Hobby should always have the best lint to make his linen sheets of, the earliest potatoes by a clear fortnight, the cleanest wool whereof to weave his homespun, for Hobby was a weaver as well as a bonnet laird on a small scale. Above all, Hobby had the name of Scylla, and nothing makes for envy like that, whether in town street or countryside. "Envying and grieving at the good of your neighbour, aye, there ye hae its bairns," said Silver Sand, noddingly warning at us to point the moral. "The love of Scylla is the root of all evil, and even the very name of it breeds unkindness and ill will." But upon a day, this Bell Kinmont, that had been counted the richest tochted lass in 7 parishes, settled the matter of a son-in-law for her father without consulting her father. There was a Hieland marching regiment in Dumfries, and squads of them used to tramp here and there through the countryside, airing their braw feathers in their bonnets, and drawing in the young lads to list with them by the glint of their accoutrements, or maybe the merry noise of the pipe and drum that went before them and set the pulses jumping. So, with a blithe young Hieland sergeant in His Majesty's 93rd Regiment, Hamish by name, Bell Kinmont took the road, and the old men only sat the stiller at his loom and cawed away at the shuttle the harder. And if he could not manage to weave himself a new daughter, at least he worked so hard that he seldom minded the one he had lost. The name of her never more crossed his lips, and when anybody, gentle or simple, speered for Bell, he shut the door in their faces and syne went ben again to his weaving. So a year or two slipped by, and maybe another 5 or 6 at the back of that, and still no word of Bell. When, true as I'm telling you, who but Bell brought back word of herself. Faith, it was a strange word. I mind it clear as yesterday, for it was me, Silver Sand, that am this day an old done man, who gat the first glimpse of her. It was a fine summer morn, early in June, and the clouds in the sky to the east were just the colour of the first briar rosebuds in the hedge by the roadside. I came up the brae, whistling like a linty, and as free a care, for my heart was light in those good days. There stood the cot of Breckenside before me, shining white in the sun. For the old miser, though he spared most other things, never was a sparer of a good whitewash. I was just beginning to listen for the click-clack of Hobby's shuttle, when down by the waterside methought I saw a fairly. Fegs, I said to myself, that surely the old times had come back again, and that the wee folk were disporting themselves once more in broad daylight. For on the grass by the burn, a bonny bit bairn ran hither and thither, waving its hands and laughing to the heavens for very gladness. The night had been calm, a gossamer nicht as we gypsy folk call it, and from head to hemlock, and from lowly bracken to tall queen of the meadow, the silver threads were stretched taut like the cordage of some sea-going ship. The dew shone silver clear on ilka silken strand, and the blobs o' it were like pearls and diamonds in the burning sun. And aye the langer I stood the wilder the bairn ran, and loupit lightfoot as a fairy herself. "Bonny, bonny, oh bonny!" she cried, clapping her hands and laughing. "See, mither, mither, are they no Uncle Bonny?" Then, by the side of the beck, as if, being wearied with travel, she had set her down to take a drink of the Calla burn water, I saw a woman sit. She was aneath a bush of hazel, and her head was resting tired-like on her hand. So, being back there in the shadow, I had not noticed her at first, being taken up as was small wonder with the sight of that bonny yellow-haired bairn flittering here and there like a butterfly in the sun. Then the wee lass saw me, and ran whatever she could to me. She took my hand, and syne looked up in my face as trustful-like as if she had kenned me all her days. "Here, Manny," she cried, "come and walk on my Minnie to me, for I canna. She winna hearken when wee Elsie speaks to her." Hand in hand we went up to the poor thing, and even as I gaed a great fear gripped me by the heart. For the woman sat still even when my step must have sounded in her. I laid my hand on her, and as I'm a living man she was clay-called. The bairn looked ever up into my face. "Can you no walk on my mother either?" she said, wistfully. "No," says I, "no, my poor wee lassie. For truth to tell, I kenned not what to say." "Will Minnie never walken?" she asked again, bright as a button. "I fear not, bonny lassie," said I, and the tear was in my eye. Then the elf clapped her hands and danced like a yellow butterfly over the lea. "Then she will na greet ony mair. She will na be hungry ony mair. She will never need bit o' meat nor thread o' clays for evermair." She lilted the words almost as if she had been singing a tune. "She will be recht pleased, my Minnie, for oh, sir, she grat sair and often. She carried me in her arms till her ain feet were hurted, and she could gang nae further. Late yestreen she sat doon here to wash them, and I sat doon and took after that she cuddled me in her arms. Manny, are you no recht glad for my Minnie?" I telled her that I was glad, for naught less would satisfy her, though even as I spak, the word sob rose in my throat. And as we stood there looking at the woman, sitting with her face on her hands, what should happen but that the old miser should come hurtling to the door, and there too, looking over his shoulder, was daft Jeremy, that the village bairns were wont to pook at and call the Mounster. "What hae ye there, gypsy jock?" the old man cried, shaking a stick at me. "Keep awa from my door with your doxies and flittering changeling bairns." But I was civil to him for his age's sake, and also because of the witless man that was looking over his shoulder, for it's not good to cross such as the Lord has smitten in their understanding, and so do my own folk never. "It's a woman, Laird Kinmont," quoth I, "that hath set herself down to die by your burnside." "Die?" cried he with a queer scream, more like a frightened hen flying off down the box. "What na word is that to speak? A woman dead by my burnside? What recht had she there? What is taking sic a liberty with Hobby Kinmont?" "Nay, you can come and see for yourself," said I, a little nettled at the carle's hardness of heart. So the old miser, bent and stiff, came hurtling barehead down the path, and behind him, looking most uncanny, danced daft Jeremy, combing his hair with a weaver's heckle, and muttering to himself. The morning sunshine fell fair on this strange couple, and when she saw him, the little maid let go my hand, but he pushed her off. Whereat, being nothing affronted, the witch caught at his stick and pulled it away from him before he could resist. Then she gat astride and played horses with it on the green grass of the burnside dell. It was like an incantation. But without heeding her, the old man went to the woman and, lifting up her head, looked steadfastly in her face. "God in his heaven be merciful," he cried. "It's my ain dochter, Belle." Then the natural laughed loud and long, and wrapping his heckle in a wisp of paper, he played a tune upon it with his mouth, dancing round and crying, "There's her richt for ye. Ye said she hadna a richt, Led Kinmont. You were that hard that ye wouldna fee the fremit woman round to die at your dykeside. But Belle has come home to claim her aim. Coffin and clay, 6 fit o' clean kirkyard sods. Faith, I wish all Daft Jeremy's enemies had the same, nae mair, nae less. But it's as weel as it is, Led Kinmont, for Jeremy canna be doing with grown women about the hoose of Breconside, and it's him that has the say noo, ye ken." But the old man answered nothing, good nor ill. He only stood and looked down at his daughter, muttering to himself words that sounded like, "Belle has come hame. My bairn has come back to me at last." So in time the miser buried his daughter decently, and took the little lass hame to him to bring up in the cot house of Breconside. But when this came to be talked about in the countryside, there was a well-to-do woman in Dumfries too, a Mistress Comley or Comleen, that was some kin to Belle Kinmont through her ain mother, and when she heard of the poor bairn shut up in that lonesome house wi' only an old miser and a daft man, she had heart pity on her, and as soon as she had shut her shop one Saturday afternoon, off she sets to Breconside in a pony cart that she used to bring her goods up from the port. It was but a cold rife welcome she got at the White House of Breconside, but sorrow a bit Margaret Comlin cared for that. She tied up her sonsie beast, that was, like herself, fat as pats o' butter, to the yett post of the old miser's garden. And syne, when he came to the door himself, she did not take a couple of minutes in telling the old runt her business, plump and plain. "I hae come to ask you to put awa that daft man," she said, "and get a decent woman for a housekeeper, Led Kinmont." "Meaning yourself, Margaret Comlin," interrupted the miser with a cunning smirk. He had shut the door in her face and was conducting negotiation through a crack. "Me be your housekeeper?" cried the visitor. "Me that's a ratepayer and a weel-considered indweller of the borough of Dumfries? Man, I wouldna cross your doorstep though you were the provost. But I hear ye hae this bit bairn in the hoose, and a lassie bairn too. That's full cousin's dochter to mysel. I hae come to tell you that it is neither Christian nor decent to bring up the wee thing button ben wi' a kenned natural like Daft Jeremy, that has twice been tried for his life for the shedding of blood." From behind the closed inner door of the cot-house there came a high-pitched angry cry that garred the very blood run chill as ice in Margaret Comlin's veins. I mean that the thought of it did it afterwards, for at the time she just looked about her to see that Donald, her pony, was not so far away, and that the road was clear to the light market cart, in case that she had to make a break for it. She had eke a steve-staff in her hand, that the loons of the port ken brawly the weight of. It was the voice of the man wanton went crying out to be at her that she heard. "She's ta'en for me my good name," his words reached her through the very stone and lime of the house, "and she would tak the bonny siller oot of your black kiss that you and Jeremy had sae carefully. Gie the woman the bit lassie bairn, Led Kinmont, and let her be gone. For less winna serve her, and forby a bairn is nocht but an expense and an eating up o' good meat in ony man's hoose." And while the din was at its height in the cot, there came a sound to Mistress Comlin's ear that garred her kind heart light within her. It was like the whimpering of a bairn that is ill-used and dares not cry out loud. And with that she forgot her fear of the strange natural Daft Jeremy, and with her naked hand she shook the door of the cot-house of Breconside till the iron stinchel clattered in its ring. "The magistrates of Dumfries shall ken of this, or I am a day older," she cried into them. "Gie me out the lassie, or the preventative men shall hear of the barrels ye hae hidden in the yard. Supervisor Imry shall be here and search every inch high and low if ye lay as muckle as a finger on the most innocent wayne." And even as she cried out threatenings and shook the stout oaken door so that the leaves almost fell asunder, Margaret Comlin heard a noise behind her, and whipped about quickly with her heart in her mouth, for she thought it was Daft Jeremy come out to slay her. But instead it was the wee lass herself that had escaped by a kind of miracle through the window of the ormery or pantry closet, for Led Kinmont had it closed with a board grudging the expense of glass. The lass was greeting and laughing at the same time, feared to the marrow of her bits of bones, but yet cruise withal. Mistress Comlin marvelled to see her. "I ha' left the stead of my teeth in his hand, I wot," she said as Mistress Comlin helped her into the light cart at the roadside. "And see what I brought with me," she added as they drove away. It was a shagreen leather pocket-book, like those which well-to-do farmers carry, or rich English drovers that come to the cattle trusts to buy for the English market. And Mistress Comlin, struck with fear lest she should be deleted as a thief, would have turned back. But that at that very moment, out of the door of the cot there burst a terrifying figure, even Daft Jeremy himself, a great flesher's knife uplifted in his hand. He was screeching out words without meaning, and looked so flaysome that the decent woman e'en slipped the shagreen purse into a reticule basket and laid whiplash to Donald, till that pampered beast must have thought that the punishment of all his sins had overtaken him at once. The natural pursued after them with these and such like affrighting outcries to the very entering of Dumfries town. And never had Margaret Comlin, decent woman, been so glad to recognise His Majesty's authority as when she saw Supervisor Imry with his 2-3 men on his come riding up from the brig end, and out upon the green grass of the Teregles Pays. But she said nothing, only gave them a good day in passing and bade them beware of that poor natural Daft Jeremy that was in one of his fits of anger that day. "Sic a critter should be in the tow booth. He's a danger to the lieges," said Supervisor Imry, adding more cautiously, "that is, were it know that he was to be a cess on the borough and parish." When Mistress Comlin got to her own door, she first delivered Donald into the hands of her serving prentice, Robin Garmery, as stout and blithe a lad as ever walked the plainstanes. But the wee lass she took by the hand up to her own chamber, and there she stripped her to the skin and washed her, and put fine raiment on her, new from the shop, ay, and did not rest from her labours till she had gathered every old rag that she had found on her, and committed them to the flames, as if they had been art and part in the wizardry of Laird Kinmont, her grandfather, and the coming ill repute of the white cot-house on the brae face of Breckenside. For at that time it was never suspected by what dread means it came to pass that old Miser Hobby had grown so passing rich, nor yet the bond that was between him and his strange housemate and crony Daft Jeremy. But had Mistress Comlin examined what was contained in the shagreen pocket-book, she might have come nearer to the truth than an entire bench of magistrates summoned and set aside for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of them that do well. But fearing she knew not clearly what, she sealed it up in a clean white wrapper and laid it aside in her drawer, saying to herself, "If this be honestly come by, the laird is no the man to forget to coin for his ain. And if no—" Here a shake of the head and a shrewd smile intimated that the contents of the pocket-book might one day be useful to its finder, little Elsie Comlin, as she was now to be named. "And wha has a better recht?" the shopkeeper would add, perhaps to salve her conscience in the matter. But indeed it was but seldom, the pocket-books once safe in her drawer, that she thought about the matter at all. For Margaret Comlin was a busy woman of affairs, having under her serving lasses and prentice loons, a shop on the ground floor of a house in the Vennel, and a well-patronised stall in the market. All day she went to and fro, busily commending her goods and reproving her underlings with equal earnestness and point. Sunday and Saturday the wrinkle was never off her brow. Like Martha in the Scripture, she was careful and troubled about many things. She read but seldom, and when she did her memory retained not long the imprint of what she read. So that our young monkey Elsie, being fresh from the mischief-making of the grammar school, where she was drilled with a class of boys, used to shift the marker of woven silk back 10 pages or so in the godly book over which her foster-mother fell asleep on Sabbath afternoons, by which means Mistress Comlin was induced to peruse the same improving passage at least 50 times in the course of a year, yet without once discovering or for a moment suspecting the fact. For all that, she saw to it that Elsie did her nightly school tasks, recommending the master to palmy her well if she should ever come to school unprepared. But being a quick and ready learner, the young lass needed the less encouragement of that kind. As she grew elder too, Elsie would, upon occasions, serve a customer in the shop, though Margaret Comlin never allowed her to stand on the street among the babble of tongues at the market stall. In a little time she could distinguish the hanks of yarn and thread, the webs of wincey and bolts of linen, as well as her mistress, and was counted a shrewd and capable hand at a bargain before she was 15. All this time her grandfather, the old Miser Hobby, lived on in the little white house up among the fir-woods of Breckenside, growing ever harder and richer, at least according to the clashes of the country folk. By day, and sometimes far into the night, the click of his shuttle was never silent, and being an old man it was thought a marvel how he could sit so long at his loom. And still Daft Jeremy abode with him and filled his perns. Sometimes the natural would sit on the dyke-top at the end of the cottage and laugh at the farmers as they rode by, crying names and unco words after them, so that many shunned to pass that way in the gloaming for fear of the half-witted strong creature that mocked and mowed and danced at the lonely gable end. And they were of excellent judgment who did so. But when Riddick of Lang Barnes broke his neck bone within a mile of Laird Kinmont's loaning, and less than a month after that Lang Hutchin was found one snowy Sabbath morn lying dead with never a mark on his body, save that his face was twisted out of all image of mankind and is e'en terrible to see, there were those who began to whisper fearsome things about the innocent appearing white cot at the top of the Langwood of Brecon side. Yet there were others again, and they a stout-hearted majority, who scoffed and told how Riddick had been seen in market carrying more than his load of whisky, and that as for Lang Hutchin, had he not dared his maker that day to strike him dead if he spoke not the truth, all that heard him well knowing that even as he uplifted his hand he lied in his throat. Nor was Elsie wholly forgotten by her only near of kin. Twice or thrice a year there came from the cottage a web of fine cloth, woven as only Laird Kinmont could weave it, with the inscription written plainly thereon, "To be sold for the benefit of the upkeep of my granddaughter, Elsie Kinmont or MacHamish," the latter being the name of the Highland sergeant who in past year had charmed the heart of the dead woman Bell, so that she counted it a light thing to leave her father's hearthstone to follow the tuck of drum. Which seeing, Mistress Comlin would toss her head and explode in incontinent scorn. "MacSkirmish, indeed! The deal for your war with the Highland MacSkirmishes atween Cape Wrath and the Links of Forth. There are no worthy yea decent burgesses of Dumfries that tacks down his shutters in the morning and counts up his bawbees in the evening." So as often as Elsie offended her patroness and did the thing she ought not, it was by this name of obloquy that Mistress Comlin called her. "Here, MacSkirmish, do you call they potatoes scrappit? There's dirt enough on them to file Nithwater for a month. But what can you expect for the doctor of a wild Highland reaver? Take your wabs of claith and be travelling up the brae. Your grandfather, the old miser, and his familiar, the daft man, will be proud to see you, I dare say, since this decent woman's law-abiding hoose is no good enough for MacSkirmishes and the likes of them." Words such as these were spoken mostly after the Wilson maid had taken her own way and gone to visit her grandfather in the cot at the head of the long wood. For to do him justice, the old miser was unwearyingly kind to Elsie, and the maid's heart was often way for the old man, weaving by his lone in the half-darkness, where the great beams of the loon almost blocked the light out of the narrow cottage window. Mostly, Daft Jeremy would vanish at her approach, though sometimes he would squat on the hearth looking at her for hours together through his dumb sullen glooms, as if he feared that she came to carry away something that of right belonged to him. He had a flute whereon he blew strains that are not of this earth, yet which had a certain harmony and rhythm in them too, like the chanties of demons that stoke the fires of hell. These things Elsie did because, as she told herself, blood is thicker than water, and also perhaps because Breconside Wood is a long wood, and Breconside Brae is a long brae, and there were many chances that one Will McQueen, the provost's son, late dux of the grammar school, and Elsie's most constant admirer, would meet her under its shades, as it might be by accident, and convoy her home again in the gloaming. It chanced late one Saturday afternoon, when the August fields stood almost ripe to the harvest, for it had been an early year on this side, that Elsie took her way slowly up the Lang Wood to see her grandfather. Daft Jeremy had brought the message in the morning, and her guardian had noted with surprise that he looked mair spruce than ordinary. "Are you to be married, Jeremy?" Mistress Comlin had asked over the counter. She was in good humour, having just completed a keenly contested bargain to her satisfaction. "Aye," cried Jeremy, executing a double shuffle on the shop floor. "And see, mistress, I hae bought a bonny fiddle to dance to at the wedding." And sure enough the daft creature took out a fiddle and bow out of brown paper parcel under his arm, and jigged uncouthly round to the sound of his own music, till the hastily angered huckster ordered him out of the shop. "As sure as death," said Mistress Comlin, retailing the matter to her own particular gossip, "the critter gaed doon the Venel bowing on his fiddle and looking fit to raise the hair off your crown." Now this good benefactress of Elsie's, though kindly of intent and of a heart that was as sound as a bell, had sundry tempers of her own which were most liable to take her on Saturdays. The perversity of they Dumfries bodies, who with the whole week wherein to do business would persist in putting it off till they cam the nearest to breaking the Lord's Day, just to buy a pennyworth of preens or a double yard of Valencians to trim their Sunday braws, spoiled her temper on the 7th day of the week. It's small wonder then that Elsie gladly snatched at the chance which Fortune and Daft Jeremy offered her of escaping from the rigours of Mrs. Comlin into the Callar Isles of the Lang Wood, to say nothing of the chance that, well, that she might meet with company there more to a young maid's mind than Caffering Goodweave's cheapening Wincy and Padso. But it so chanced that Master Will McQueen had also come across the higher power that afternoon, and less fortunate his sweetheart was left without excuse for taking an airing in the Lang Wood. His father, either ill-satisfied with his ordinary diligence, or suspecting that love-making was in the young man's mind, set him early in the day to the long labour of remarking and checking all the goods in the shop on a brand-new system of his own. Whereat Master Will chafed and fumed, bit his lip, dabbed viciously at the paper with his quill, cursing his father and the fates that bound him untimeously to his desk, when, as had been intimated to him, a certain girlish figure would be walking slowly, and as it might be expectantly, under the hazel boughs of the Lang Wood. So it chanced that, in spite of many backward glances over her shoulder, Elsie found herself still solitary, surmounting the green brae, at the top of which stood the cot-house of Breckenside, with its pew of blue reek going quietly up from the kitchen chimney. She walked the last step of the way quickly, for she was angered with Will. What business had he to keep her waiting on him? Not that she cared. It was not likely that she would care. No, indeed, not in the smallest degree likely. Still, as she came a little nearer to her destination, and heard the weird wail of the witless man's fiddle within, which suddenly ceased in the middle of a bar, Elsie Kinmont owned to herself that it would have been indeed a comforting thought if, while she was inside, she could have known that Will McQueen was biting his fingernails with impatience behind the dry stone dyke at the Loaning Foot. However, it was not to be on this occasion. There was no tall form, clad in blue from top to toe, to be seen hastening up the road across which the slant evening shadows were creeping like checker-work on a plaid. So, drawing a long breath, and resolving in her heart to stay as short a time as possible, Elsie set foot on the clean blue flagstone of the doorstep. Perhaps by the time she came out, Master Will would be there, not that she would speak to him. She would show him that he could not behave to her after this fashion with impunity. She did not care what excuse he might have. Standing on the doorstep, she listened. It was strange, she thought, she did not hear the click of her grandfather's shuttle. She had never come that way before on any working day from dawn to dusk, that she had not heard the steady wheeze of the loom and the click-clack which told that the miser was at his endless task. But now a curiously uneasy silence brooded over the cot, and with a sudden throb of the heart Elsie realised that she was alone, and that Will and the heartsome town were a very long way off indeed. But she could not turn back now. She tapped ever so lightly, telling herself that if it was not answered she would turn and run straight home again. But almost ere the first faint rap had fallen on the blistered blue paint, the door opened, and the face of Daft Jeremy appeared in the opening. He held his fiddle in one hand, and with the other he beckoned the girl confidentially within. Even then she would have turned and fled, but something in the natural's eye held her, something bright and living and daunting. She stepped over the doorstep quickly and daintily, as indeed she did all things. "Where's my grandfather?" she said. The innocent jerked his elbow in the direction of the ben-room, where stood the loom at which the miser had worked so many years. "Is he at work?" "I do not hear him," said Elsie, making as if she would pass. But Daft Jeremy stretched out his great hairy paw between her and the door, and a sudden spasm of anger crossed his features. The next moment it had passed, and he grinned in her face with loutish cunning. "Whisht," he said, holding up his finger. "You munny disturb him. He's making his will. Thousands and thousands of pounds. You and me are to be his heirs. He wouldna trust they lawyer bodies. Na. They would have putting it all by poor Jeremy. Jeremy that made it all for the laird. Jeremy that watched the hint dykes or amang the trees of the Lang Wood mony a drear winter's nicht. Jeremy that struck the stroke and howkit the hole. Why should he the siller, all the bonny gowden gillies that him and me have counted out on this table, if it werena Jeremy? And you, my bonny young lamb, you shall hae them too, for this is to be your marriage nicht, yours and mine." With a gasp of fear, Elsie rose from the seat and strove to reach the door of the inner room. "I will go to my grandfather. I must see him," she said breathlessly. "Let me pass." But Daft Jeremy, with the strange black glitter of madness in his eye, stood between her and the latch of the door. Then, quite suddenly, Elsie lost her presence of mind. "Grandfather! Grandfather!" she cried aloud. "Come! I want you!" And with her little hand she pushed against the breast of the maniac. But he set her aside as one brushes a moth away with one hand, and passing the other round her shoulders, covered her mouth tightly. "Did I no tell you to be quiet?" he hissed in her ear. "Do as I bid ye, then. The laird is no to be disturbed at his work." Then the dreadful thought came to Elsie that she was trapped and at the mercy of this wild beast. But with the thought came the calmness of resolve. There was nothing for it but to humour him till, as was likely, Will McQueen would arrive, or her benefactress send in search of her. After watching Elsie suspiciously a while, the man wanting wit took up his fiddle and began to play, if that could be called playing which contained scarcely a strain of mortal music. Only here and there the lilt of an air emerged, or suggestions of reels and strathspeys, songs and quicksteps, but all hopeless and weariful, like music played by demons in the place of ill, to taunt the damned with the ghost of happy memories. And there, in the deepening gloaming, mercifully long and clear, the girl sat and nodded approval, listening for a footfall without or a stir in the room within which her grandfather sat, if the madman spoke truth, drawing up his will. Suddenly Daft Jeremy threw down the fiddle. "What am I thinking on?" he cried. "You'll no ahead your 4 hours, bonny lassie. Bide ye here till I get a fetch a peat or twa for the hoose end." Hope dawned anew in Elsie's heart. She smiled brightly on him. "I'll get down the tea caddy," she said, and looked along the mantelpiece for it. But again the angry, threatening look flashed across the maniac's face. "Na, bide where you are, lassie, and those of Breckenside good bairns do as they are bid. What's in the tea caddy is no yours yet. It belongs to Jeremy and him." He pointed to the shut door of the silent ben-room with his finger. After standing in this attitude a while, he opened the outer door and, going out, closed it behind him again. Elsie heard the click of the lock. Then, without a moment's hesitation, she ran to the ben-room and lifted the latch. The door was fast. "Grandfather, open, quick! It's me, your Elsie, your ain Elsie!" But there was no answering movement within. No reply came from the loon. Only from the gable end she could hear the noise of peats flung rudely into a leathern wecht, and the senseless crooning of Daft Jeremy as he went about his work. However, she noticed that a ray of light streamed through a crack, and kneeling down, Elsie perceived her grandfather sitting at his loom. His brow was bent forward upon the beam, and between his hunched shoulders something showed black against the red western sunset. It seemed in shape like the haft of a knife. The girl kept her reason as she gazed. Perhaps the fighting stock from which on her father's side she came helped her in her hour of need. She heard the murderer, as she did not doubt that he was, returning. He crooned a weariful song as he fitted the key into the lock. Then she prayed as she had never prayed before for Will to come and save her. Yet no, she thought, with fear of what the madman might do to Will, falling upon him unarmed and unsuspecting. She saw no help unless it should come directly from God. But all the same, she rose mechanically and made up the fire to boil the kettle. And as she went about the house, Daft Jeremy followed her with his eyes greedily. "After all, you're a bonny lassie," he said. "You and me will do fine yet. We will be rich and ride in our carriage. Yon man doon the hoose wouldna gie me the siller that was my richt. He denied me a £1 note to buy a fiddle. Me that brocht it to him purse by purse. I get the chagrin, that was lost." Then, dazed and affrighted, the girl sat shuddering, while Jeremy, with laughter and slapping of thigh, reeled off the terrible tale of how his master and he had made a murder trap of the Long Wood, carefully selecting their victims, marking them down beforehand, drovers from Ireland and the Shire, unknown Englishmen riding to other distant markets. He related how Laird Kinmont had bidden him spring upon them unawares in the dark, how their strength was of no avail in his hands, and how the murderous pair had brought goods and gear home to the white cot-house on the brave face of Breckenside. "And yet, after all that, he refused me a £1 note to buy a fiddle to play a spring on at my own wedding," he concluded, looking at the closed door of the weaving room with a dark and threatening brow. Then, as if a thought had suddenly stung him, he took from a corner cupboard a pair of pistols, primed them, and laid them on the table before him. Then he nodded to Elsie. "Dance!" he cried with a sudden vehemence. "Dance, you lazy hizzy! Ye shall gang the same road as your granddaddy if ye cross Daft Jeremy. Do ye think to licht be me that am to be your wedded husband? Dance, missy, and I will play ye the bonny music." And there, on the blue whinstone flags of the cottage floor, Elsie Kinmont danced for her life, hour after hour, as the shadows deepened and the shaft of light ceased from the crack in the door of the ben-room, the room which contained she knew not what of strange and terrible, her dead grandfather for one thing with the haft of a knife sticking in his back. And ever as the maniac tired of one tune, Elsie called for another, and danced on to the sound of the fiddle sweeping out through the wood in eerie gusts, and to the yet weirder accompaniment of the laughter of the madman. When at last the moon rose, large and full, over the dark pines of the Lang Wood, Elsie was still dancing, pale and weary-footed, smiling with her lips, but with despair in her heart. Then all at once, suddenly dropping his fiddle, the maniac cried, "Sing! Am I to do all the work?" And Elsie, with her eyes on the long moonlit avenue, which led through the wood up to the cot-house, lifted up her voice and sang of the sadness that dwells in Yarrow. It was the first song that came into her mind. "Willie's rare, and Willie's fair, and Willie's wondrous bonny, and Willie hecht to marry me, Genever he married Onnie. She put her fear-stricken heart into the words. They seemed to leap out on the night with a tragic appeal, and with a quick nerve-jerking hope, Elsie saw a figure cross the loaning and vanish as if it ran from tree to tree. Life stirred within her when she had counted herself as good as dead, and she sang ever the louder. The mad murderer held up his hand to stop her. His quick ear or some suspicious instinct had caught a sound without. He drew a sheath knife from his pocket and opened it with a snap. "This will be quieter than a pistol," he said. Then, going on tiptoe, he silently slipped to the door. She could hear him breathing behind it. The next moment it was open and he was out. Elsie snatched the loaded pistols he had left on the table before him and pursued after. He would kill Willie, that was what was in her thought. She was sure it was he. She cried out to warn him. About the house came the panting chase. It was indeed Willie McQueen, who ran, unarmed and helpless, scarce a dozen steps from the uplifted knife of the slayer. "Into the house, Willie," she cried, stepping down from the threshold to let him pass. There was no time for thought. Elsie thrust one of the pistol barrels against the pursuer's chest. Without intention she pressed the trigger, and the next moment, with a terrible scream of agony, Daft Jeremy fell forward, making a clang of steel on the whinstone of the doorstep. Then, leaving the dead man with his forehead cold upon his weaver's beam, and the dying murderer lying where he had fallen across the threshold of the cot house of Breckenside, the pair of young folks fled down the avenue of the wood, half crazed with the multiplied terrors of the night. And as they ran, hand in hand, Elsie said pantingly and in agony of soul, "Oh, Willie, Willie, I killed a man." Then, as they reached the lights of the brig end, she added, "But God will forgive me, for I did it to save you, Willie." In the days which followed, the cot house of Breckenside was razed stone from stone by the infuriated people. The miser's ill-gotten hoards were handed over to the officers of the law, and all the murderous traffic exposed by which Laird Kinmont had so long used the madman as his instrument to gather in his spoils. The two bodies even were refused Christian burial, being thrown as they were found in a pit at the gable end of the fatal ruins. Even the road itself was carried another way, so great was the horror folk had of passing the graves of the weaver Laird and his henchman Daft Jeremy, the murderers of Lang Wood. As for Willie and Elsie, no long time passed before they crossed the sea together, that the disgrace of the dead might not cling to their children after them. And with them went Mistress Margaret Comline, who settled up her business in Dumfries with the intent that, as she declared, she might be spared to guide the footsteps of twa foolish young folks into the paths of peace and pleasantness. But even in a foreign land, and among a fremit folk, Willie and Elsie never speak of the night when she danced for her own life, and slew a man to save her sweethearts, under the pines of the Langwood of Breckenside. And that, concluded Silver Sand, when you come to think of it, is a thing little to be wondered at.